we have one more film to discuss, which we just saw today.
It's fresh.
It's fresh. It was a very long film. It was 3 hours and 2 minutes, I believe. Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell by
Tien An, but I can't remember his first name.
Okay.
Tien An is his surname. His debut film by a guy who's actually I believe a graphic novelist and now filmmaker. What's his first name? Don't embarrass me. It's Tien An.
Pham Tien An.
Pham. Yeah, Pham.
Yeah,
right.
what are you saying, Pham?
What you say, Pham?
It's PH is Pham.
Pham. Yeah, I think it's Pham Tien An. It's a debut film. And I think the kind of things you pick up about this on the grapevine before you see it is you're like, and I'm not just saying this because of the region of the world it's from, but it is picture pong versus ethical coded.
Yes.
Film, you also with these kind of with slow cinema, you're thinking of Simon Lang, you're thinking of Lav Diaz, you're thinking of a particular modality of filmmaking.
Thinking of Began as well. That
Began,
director of Kylie Blues did spring to mind,
and also
particularly the length of the camera. There were these shots that really sort of like got attached to things and then moved off. He did try. I mean, should we just give the scenario? It's a very interesting scenario. It starts off at this kind of this bar where people are watching football, and then off screen, these three guys are sort of pontificating about God and faith,
simplicity and spirituality.
Exactly. Yeah. Having what I felt was quite a basic conversation, but it kind of I was happy with the basicness at that stage because it was letting us in on the character. Off screen, which we then turn to slowly in a very interesting pan, is a crash between two mopeds. In which we later learn there's been a fatality and some injuries. And then we learn that the people who were in this crash were actually related to one of the
guy that's sitting on the left hand.
Yeah. It was actually his nephew and his sister-in-law, who were in the crash. So then he has this journey to transport the body over to somewhere very far away where this woman's from, the sister-in-law.
His hometown, basically.
His hometown.
Yeah, in the mountains of Vietnam.
And then the rest of the film takes place not in the city, not in Saigon, but in the mountains. We mostly watch him take the kid around, and then he becomes the ward for a short time of her son. The rest of the family, we understand, is migrated to America, and her former husband, who she's separated from, is kind of absentee. Nobody really knows where he is. So this guy, the uncle, has to basically Tien, was also the name of the director, has to explain death and faith and various difficult sort of issues just to this child one-on-one. Yeah. And then later on, the girlfriend of or the love interest of Tien kind of appears, and
she's now a nun,
and
she's had a spirit. She's realised her spiritual journey.
Nun. Yeah.
That's the same person.
Oh, and then
that's a flashback. Yeah.
Flashback. Okay. I didn't really cotton on.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
Some of the narrative elements here.
There's with this film. I think one of the interesting things about, I'm talking about someone else now, but Pitch Film versus Ethical, is we're looking at a world in which the spirit world and the world of reality are intrinsically bound together. But much of the mise en scène of versus Ethical is quite banal. It's plastic chairs sitting outside decking. It's people boiling rice. It's copper kettles. It's all this kind of ordinary stuff. And then you get these kind of slow emergences of the sublime, of the spirit world into the world of the living. I think with this film, it does that, and it often does it to great in a great register and great key and very powerfully, but maybe it does them a little bit too clumsily. So it shows us moments where he's going on a spiritual journey, basically. He meets various characters, some of whom might be real, some of who are ghosts, in the sense of he has this kind of flashback to this meeting with this girl before she became a nun and before he left for Saigon, where he looks like his age now, but she looks a bit younger. He meets a sort of Vietnam War veteran in this shack, and there's lots of these great these monologues.
This is maybe one of the longest shots. It goes to
really
various different
good,
locations and really drifts. Yeah, it's really nice.
There's an encounter with an old woman who's sort of got this soothsayery vibe about her. There's lots of moments where, as he's going on this journey, once he's kind of done the business of the funeral, and the funeral is like ethnographically really well captured. There's like a Highland Vietnamese funeral. It's really well explored, and this kind of syncretic kind of mixture of like all this adaptation of Catholicism in this kind of particularly Vietnamese way. That's very cool. It slaps. It's really good. And then we get these kind of little suggestions that we're in this liminal space now. And, you know, there's lots of like Tarkovskian veils blowing in windows and the camera panning slowly outside, and color matching. And then there's lots of moments where Tien is suddenly being woken up rudely by someone. He's been asleep and we're like, oh, was the scene we just saw a dream? Is it real?
My worry is almost that it was at its best when it was being derivative. But I could feel a certain almost recognizable, you know, Tien and style coming through. But then I wondered whether it wasn't just reminding me of other directors that
he's like this kind of perfect smorgasbord in a way, because he's like, one thing Verisathical has is like Verisathical isn't very interested in, I suppose, increasingly kind of youth culture. Whereas we get a bit more of like young lads they go to a kind of sexy spa where he gets a bit of a handy on the table. We get
just before we get there. This is so good. This bit
I love
where
that
he's sort of this erotic masseuse thing happening, and then he gets an emergency phone call, and he has to be reminded twice to actually check the phone, because obviously it's hugely important. Relates to his sister-in-law, who we just sort of saw it before. That whole bit, that was all really going
when
really
it was
well.
in Saigon, it was perfect.
Very
and then
exciting.
it kind of stumbled on its entry into the spirit world. It kind of tripped over the door, I think, over the door frame a little bit. And it was like, because everything was possible, it didn't really know what was permissible.
Yeah, and I felt like the spiritual element was mostly being communicated through rather sort of bold, but rather kind of obvious sound design fluctuations. I mean, there are amazing sort of bits where like it like rains and then stops raining, and then you see these like little butterflies or flies in the light. There are some shots that are totally magical and unimpeachable, you know, really. But yeah, I was clock watching a lot in the final hour. I just wasn't.
There's a point where I thought, wow, I was like, yeah, I'm like, we must be there now. When I looked down, I was like, wow, we've got the whole hour left to go. And I was like, the film doesn't.
We've all been there, guys.
Yeah, we've all been there. I think 2 hours in, the film doesn't really go anywhere more interesting. It just repeats this kind of, is it a dream? Is it real? Kind of narrative in a way that, you know, remember the best thing that someone like Verisathical does is with, say, Uncle Boon Mi, is when we get the emergence of the ghost at the table.
Yeah.
Like this great, and it's so tense, and it's really one of the greatest scenes of the 21st century on film. It's absolutely unimpeachable, incredible moment of the interbleeding of the banal and the spiritual and the sublime. And here it's kind of like this pick and mix of, and here's another kind of cool sublime thing that I'm doing, and here's another one. It was a bit too much of a buffet of like significant, metaphorically significant moments. And I think they were all great. They were all like really, really beautifully shot, and they were really, really lovely, and there was a real heart to all of them. Like you know, but it didn't hang together really as like a coherent, you know, even if you go into the kind of strange labyrinth of the spirit world, it can still feel coherent. You know, I think about like the Taste of Green Papaya or whatever, like films like that.
Scent of the Green Papaya.
Scent of the Green Papaya, which kind of can do stuff like this and have this kind of coherence even through incoherence. Or Simon Lang does it really well with Goodbye Dragon Inn, you know, this strange liminal space of this cinema
what it is
unfolding, and it feels sensory. Weird, but it feels kind of like the architecture of the dream is coherent.
Part of achieving that sensory effect, I think, is a bit of refinement. You know, Goodbye Dragon Inn is a great thing to reference. In fact, lots of Simon Lang is good to reference because he's good at pulling back and isolating particular feelings and things. And actually, weirdly, I think some of these frames almost felt too busy, even though it was very slow and, you know, but it just didn't quite know what it was looking at. I think there's something beautiful about Verisathical, although I'm always have to admit in these conversations I'm not as keen on Verisathical as most people whose opinion I respect are. He's not really. I much prefer Simon Lang, but just to go to Tarkovsky, who's the second most kind of, or maybe the first most visible influence in this film. You know, I think what's great about Tarkovsky is he observes things in such a deliberate way, and he notices the thing that you want to look at in every scene and allows you to look at it, and it's not a thing that can really be put into words, you know, and it'll just be, and then he's bold enough like all great artists, when something really works, he's bold enough to double down and do it really heavily. So like, there's that scene in Mirror where like there's like a bit of condensation on a sort of teak table, and it kind of evaporates in almost exact but not quite synchronicity with a kind of is it Ligeti or some kind of like orchestral, like sort of experimental orchestral climax, or just all the moments where like a glass breaks and a bird comes out. These moments that are very, very deliberate, and they always let us look at the thing we most want to look at, but they don't sort of ram our heads with it, but they know that that's what we want to see.
Yeah.
Didn't get that in this film. It felt sometimes just a bit like, especially with the cinematography, which, because he was trying to do this elaborate thing where the camera was still and then moving again and still, and following the characters clearly too quite difficult to follow scenes. You could see that the frame was just being cropped in a bit sometimes in order to manage maybe extraneous things being in shot, or like a bit of camera shake that might have been corrected.
It was good when it was
a bit clumsy,
It was good when it was obviously it's most controlled, like this opening scene where we have it's a scene of three thirds. We have this football game and this mascot who suddenly breaks away from spectating the game to go and stop trying to hand out flyers or something. And that's when we're introduced to these three characters having this kind of lazy, like, I think the point is they're having a really kind of shallow conversation about spirituality, because they haven't gone on this journey yet. They don't really know what they're talking about, but they're kind of pontificating about the spirit world and about faith. And then the camera pans to this accident, and that so poised and good. And it tries to do it later with this kind of panning, and sometimes it felt a bit messy and unnecessary, through the hospital ward and things like that. And so I think it was like, there's a very famous anthropology book called Forest of Symbols about this society that is founded on almost like in a kind of almost is ODing itself on symbology, basically. And so there's this sense where it was almost kind of going too hard. So we get, where Tarkovsky will give us a bird, we get a little chick, and then we get some ducks, and then we got some roosters, and then we get another bird that flies in. Then we've got the funeral, and there's suddenly a bird that flies into the funeral, and we get the bird, and he's like, okay, the bird's a symbol, I'm going to keep doing it. So it kind of spams the copy and paste on some of these symbols a bit too much.
It's a very nice scene with some chickens, but I still don't quite like.
Yeah, it was just a bit too much.
It doesn't have the raw sense of purpose that Tarkovsky's chicken bit in Mirror has.
Yeah, so in my head, and one thing that was kind of spinning around in my head, it was like, and I didn't know if this was a deliberate strategy, is like, for a long time, the moments that seemed keyed into being subliminal almost didn't reach that. It's like, are they sort of failing intentionally as sublime moments, because everything's there to make you think that I'm seeing the face of God, but you weren't quite seeing it. And was it like, and part of me was like, in a generous reading, I was like, maybe he's making his point. There's this scene which is a literal recreation of a scene from Solaris, when we see the river with the kind of reeds floating in it, and it's like, it's so overdetermined, that image, that it's got to be intentional, and he's not thinking, this is as good as Tarkovsky. He's thinking, I'm reminding you of another thing.
I hope it's not sort of Tarantino sample culture.
Yeah, I didn't recognize any of the shots in that film, really, though. I think that there was, and I kind of wondered if he was allowing these things to kind of fail just on the cusp of reaching there, because it's a guy who's on a journey. He's not completed the spiritual journey. And so I thought maybe that was a clever thing he's doing, where he's kind of allowing these scenes to fail on the cusp of sublimity almost. And he's actually not showing us the spirit world at all. He's showing us all these things that kind of shallowly, in the world of the superficial, gesture towards it. Because, one of the things what is a film called Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell? And when Tien Ans talks about the film, he said the cocoon shell is like a Vietnamese like idiom about like being trapped in the superficial world of sort of celebrity or being an influencer.
It's like a Matrix thing.
Yeah, or you might say like someone who's just obsessed with being an influencer in Saigon, right? It's like, in the cocoon shell. So are we seeing the film from within
the sunken place?
In the sunken place, yeah. Are we seeing the whole film from within the cocoon shell? Someone who's trying to escape the world of banal appearance, and
it doesn't quite achieve that noble aim. Because I'm very into. I think Petzold is quite good at it. In The Fire, for instance, it kind of looking at the
he's really
feel of not to
sparing.
feel it, as a poet once said. you
Yeah.
know.
He's really sparing the pencil. I think, I feel really generous and warm towards this film. I just feel like you said, in the lose afterwards, you're like, his second film is going to bang. Like,
Don't share the things that I said to you.
Sorry. You said, don't scream. That's one thing you said. But I think one of the, so there's, I think he will probably refine this method. Whereas the funny thing is, he's kind of gone at it from the other end of the wedge, because when you look at someone like Verus Ethical starts off actually in a really mysterious object at noon. It was actually a really restrained, really restrained film, and Bill adds all the stuff, and
he plays with too many toys, I think, on his debut. But
he's got such a rich heritage, like a rich and recent heritage of slow cinema.
I think this film is struggling to get distribution, and I think it should be distributed.
Shame,
but I wouldn't envy someone who was trying to get it into cinemas.
It's a hard sell to get this into Picture House, a 3-hour, quite contemplative film that's very beautiful and difficult.
But it won the Camera d'Or. It was. I think that there should be some law where the film that wins the award for camera at Cannes gets distributed in the UK
automatically.
Somehow. I don't know what mechanism. Maybe we need a planned economy.
I feel like this will show like Curzon and maybe the ICA.
Well, it won't show if it doesn't get distribution.
It must. It'll get distribution, surely.
It might not.
It's a shame.
There's only how many distributors? Curzon doesn't really buy this kind of thing now, but Curzon doesn't just have.
I don't mean them being a distributor, but someone will distribute it. And imagine a screening at.
If Picture House haven't picked up, and then there's that thing, New Wave Films. They tend to pick up things. There's this thing. What's it called? The one that picked up Do Not Expect Too Much of the End of the World.
Oh, the Rowdy Jude.
The Rowdy Jude. But again, it doesn't quite fall into the right space.
It's not tied enough. The only way it would happen is if people make enough shouts about it being basically like for a Pitchfork Verus Ethical, which I don't think is reasonable.
Even our praise of it is not really fulsome enough to guarantee. Not that we have that much influence, but it's like I don't think that many people are going to love it enough.
No,
to really get
I'm glad it's
but that's fine. He'll make a better film, hopefully, and then that film will do well.
But I did really like it.
Yeah,
of all the films I've seen so far, I think it was, maybe the most interesting. And I think Breat was the most interesting. Actually, I think this was the most kind of
true. Out of the films,
this one matched the idea I have of what a really good art house film
out of the films
should be.
Out of the films we discussed, I guess I'm most impressed by this one.